Have you ever heard a story that was so strange, so unbelievable, that it sent a shiver down your spine? Well, get ready for one that will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about coincidence and fate. In 1898, a writer named Morgan Robertson sat down at his desk. He was a former seaman, a man who knew the ocean's moods and the inner workings of ships like the back of his hand. He decided to write a novel, a work of fiction about the greatest, most luxurious ship ever built by human hands. He imagined a vessel so immense, so technologically advanced, that it was hailed as a symbol of human progress, a floating palace that was, in its creator's own words, unsinkable. He gave this marvel of engineering a fittingly grand name, the Titan. In his story, this magnificent ship sets off on its maiden voyage across the frigid North Atlantic, carrying the wealthiest and most influential people in the world. But on a cold April night, tragedy strikes. The unsinkable Titan, steaming ahead at full speed, collides with a massive iceberg. The impact tears a hole in its side, and the grand vessel, the pinnacle of human achievement, founders and sinks into the dark, icy water, taking thousands of lives with it. A chilling tale, right? A cautionary story about the dangers of human arrogance, of believing we can conquer nature. But here's where the story takes a turn from fiction to fact, from a simple novel to an eerie, almost terrifying prophecy. 14 years later, in 1912, it happened. Only this time, the ship wasn't a creation of paper and ink. It was real. And its name wasn't the Titan. It was the Titanic. The story of its sinking is one we all know, a tragedy etched into our collective history. But what most people don't know is just how closely its fate mirrored the fictional story written over a decade earlier. The novel was called Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. When it was first published, it didn't make much of a splash. It was just another adventure story, a sea yarn from a writer who knew his subject. People read it, perhaps enjoyed it, and then moved on. It was a tale of hubris, a fictional disaster meant to entertain. But then, on April 15th, 1912, news began to spread around the world, first in whispers, then in screaming headlines. The RMS Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship ever built, had sunk on its first voyage. And as the horrifying details emerged, people who had read Morgan Robertson's forgotten novel began to notice something deeply unsettling. The similarities between the fictional Titan and the real-life Titanic were far too close to simply ignore. It was as if Robertson hadn't written a story, but a script for a future disaster. Let's break down just how shocking these similarities are. First, the names themselves, Titan and Titanic. Almost identical, both evoking a sense of immense power and scale. In the novel, the Titan was described as the largest ship ever built, a floating city weighing 70,000 tons. In reality, the Titanic was the largest ship of its time, weighing 66,000 tons. Both were hailed by their builders and the public as unsinkable triumphs of modern engineering. Now, let's look at the circumstances of the disaster. In Robertson's book, the Titan hits an iceberg on its starboard side on a cold night in April, around midnight, while traveling through the North Atlantic. The Titanic? It struck an iceberg on its starboard side on a cold night in April, around midnight, while traveling through the North Atlantic. The location of the collision in both the book and real life was approximately 400 nautical miles from Newfoundland. It's enough to make your hair stand on end, but it gets even more specific and even more chilling. Both ships were traveling at nearly their maximum speed, believing their modern construction made them immune to the dangers of ice. The Titan was described as moving at 25 knots. The Titanic was moving at around 22.5 knots when it hit the iceberg. The speed was a critical factor in the scale of the damage for both vessels. And then there's the most tragic parallel of all, the lifeboats. A key point in Robertson's novel was that the unsinkable Titan carried only the bare legal minimum number of lifeboats, nowhere near enough for all its passengers and crew. He wrote that it carried as few as the law allowed. This fatal oversight was a central element of his fictional tragedy. 14 years later, this exact same detail became the Titanic's most horrifying reality. The real ship carried lifeboats for only about half of the 2,200 people on board. In both the story and in real life, this catastrophic lack of preparation meant that when the unsinkable ships began to founder, more than half of the people aboard were doomed. In the book, over half of the 2,500 passengers are lost. In reality, over 1,500 of the 2,200 people on the Titanic perished. Let's recap these eerie coincidences. Ship names: Titan and Titanic. Both described as the largest ever built and unsinkable. Both hit an iceberg on a cold April night in the North Atlantic. Both were traveling at over 20 knots. Both had a catastrophic shortage of lifeboats. Both lost more than half of the souls on board. The dimensions were even incredibly close. Robertson's fictional Titan was 800 feet long. The real Titanic was 882 feet long. The details aligned so perfectly, it feels less like a coincidence and more like a blueprint. So, what are we to make of this? How could a book written 14 years earlier match a real-world event with such terrifying accuracy? When the Titanic sank, people immediately rediscovered Robertson's novel. Many hailed him as a psychic, a prophet who had been given a vision of the future. The press was in a frenzy, and the story of the book that predicted the Titanic's doom spread like wildfire. But Morgan Robertson himself strongly denied any supernatural abilities. When asked how he could have possibly known, his answer was chillingly practical. He wasn't a psychic, he insisted. He was simply an expert. Having spent years at sea, he understood shipbuilding, the laws of physics, and maritime regulations. He knew the North Atlantic shipping lanes were dangerous in April. He saw the trend of building bigger and faster ships, and he saw the human tendency toward arrogance and complacency. He knew that calling a ship unsinkable was tempting fate. He understood that the regulations for lifeboats hadn't kept pace with the size of these new superliners. So, he claimed, he simply put all the pieces together. He created a scenario based on his professional knowledge of what could happen if the biggest ship ever built, with too few lifeboats, steamed full speed into an ice field. The result was the wreck of the Titan. He wasn't predicting the future. He was just pointing out a disaster waiting to happen. In his view, it wasn't a prophecy, but an inevitability born from human pride and a flawed system. Still, even with his logical explanation, the parallels remain haunting. The specificity of the details, the name, the month, the cause, the outcome, goes far beyond a simple educated guess. It feels like something more. Whether you believe in fate, premonition, or just the stunning power of coincidence, the story of the Titan and the Titanic is a powerful reminder of our own vulnerability. Maybe it was just a statistical anomaly, a 1 in a billion coincidence. Maybe Morgan Robertson's subconscious mind tapped into something beyond our understanding, a flicker of foresight. Or maybe, and this is perhaps the most profound possibility, it's just a story that humanity was destined to live out. A repeating cycle of pride, tragedy, and consequence. It's the timeless tale of believing we are invincible, right up until the moment we discover that we are not. The story of the Titan and the Titanic serves as an eternal echo, a warning from the past that whispers across the decades. No matter how advanced we become, we must never forget the power of nature and the price of our own arrogance. Thank you so much for watching. If this story fascinated you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the mysteries of history. Let me know in the comments what you think. Coincidence or something more? See you next time.